All right, guys, welcome back. We are here with Yanks for another limited set review for the Brothers War. Dominaria is almost over and Brothers War is just around the corner. So in today's video, Yanks and I are going to be going over the introduction to the new set. We're going to be talking about returning and new mechanics, as well as the different archetypes that are going to be available in the set, and a couple of just interesting tidbits about Brothers War and what to expect. Yanks, tell us, are you a fan of Brothers War?
I am. This takes us way back to the very beginning of Magic. The first kind of Magic-specific story ever told was the Brothers War. So I'm excited to be going back to the roots of the game, shall we say.
Nice. So we're going to go ahead and, like I said, just kick it off with the new mechanics, get the most interesting thing out of the way. So Combat Thresher here, guys, has an ability called Prototype. It says you may cast the spell with different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps the abilities and type. So my understanding of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Yanks, is that you can, instead of paying 7, you can pay 3. It now becomes a 1/1 with the same abilities, double strike, and whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward mechanic. It's just an alternate casting cost. And generally, we haven't seen every card yet. Generally, we'll have an alternate power and toughness as well.
Yeah, now I'm wondering what is the way that we're going to, like in paper Magic, how are we going to like denote which one this was cast as?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're going to see something, the way that the card is designed, it looks a little bit like a level up, which use counters. So I wonder if you'll just be like putting a counter on the prototype box or something like that.
That makes sense. I know that like there was also the one where you flipped them upside down depending on the way they cast. Like in the original Kamigawa, they kind of did that, which was interesting. So I'm not quite sure what the plan is for this one, and if a dice gets bumped, if there's going to be any sort of like weird judge issues here. But I feel like for the most part, everybody's going to agree because 3 and 7 are quite different. So it's going to be tough to sneak and change that mid-game.
Mtgnerdgirl is proudly sponsored by CoolStuffInc.com. When you use promo code MNG5 at checkout, you'll receive a free exclusive Mtgnerdgirl vampire token, as well as 5% off your entire order. Show your support for her content and get this free bonus by using the code MNG5. Only at CoolStuffInc.com. Cool stuff in stock.
Yeah, otherwise it's pretty straightforward. I guess the couple sort of caveats that always apply with alternate casting costs. This is 7 mana card, so like a Disdainful Stroke will counter it even if you prototype it. It is a colorless card even if you play it for 2 and a white. It is a 7-drop on the battlefield for anything that cares about casting cost, that sort of thing. But otherwise it's pretty straightforward. And one thing I do like is that we've seen one of the tools they have used in recent times with artifacts is colored artifacts. And they went away from that in this set and just went with these artifacts that have alternate casting costs to try to get back to that retro feel. Like there are no vehicles in this set because there were no vehicles in original artifact sets in Magic. So they kind of are using different twists to make it feel a little bit more retro.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you mentioned that this is still a colorless artifact, but possibly if and we don't, the entire set's not spoiled yet, so we might see Prototype in other color cards as well. And this will change the color identity for those of you guys who are EDH players out there, which could be an interesting addition to Commander decks. But yeah, I agree, it's a pretty straightforward mechanic.
Agreed.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to be taking a look at Power Stones. Now, this is a new sort of token that was actually introduced ever so slightly in Dominaria United. The last Karn that was printed was actually able to produce Power Stones that add colorless mana. But now it's officially a new type of token that we're getting throughout this set and potentially continuing similar to Blood, Treasure, or Clues, right? Which we've seen a lot and they've been coming up more and more. So Stern Lesson is a 3-mana instant that says, draw 2 cards, then discard a card, create a tapped Power Stone token, which is sort of like creating a tapped clue. You can't actually activate it the turn that it's cast, which is preventing you from ramping that turn, but an interesting mechanic. What do you think of Power Stones, Yanks?
It's interesting because it's going to put a lot of ramp into the format, but it's very specific ramp in that it only works on artifacts, although it does for artifact spells. although it does work for any type of ability.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's a lot of like really big stuff. Like as you guys will see when we get to the archetypes, there's actually a Power Stone sort of theme in the set. So you actually can just draft an entire deck that's sort of based around these Power Stones, which is a pretty sweet idea.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this plays out. I mean, it's going to fit great in this set because you have so many artifacts. Just curious what it's going to be like in I know we're generally talk limited, but how this functions when you get sets in standard that aren't a lot of artifacts.
Certainly true. Let's go ahead and move on to a returning mechanic now. Honestly, guys, there's not a lot of new stuff in this set in comparison to some of the last sets that we've seen. So we are going to be diving back into some older things that we are seeing that are returning, but that kind of fits that sort of Brothers War retro feel like Yanks was talking about earlier. So we're going to see the return of Surveil, which you guys can see here in the dig site, a land that allows you to just pay 3, look at the top card of your library, and if you don't like it, you can put it into your graveyard. This is an interesting mechanic. They've chosen to now add Surveil as sort of an evergreen mechanic and changing the wording on a lot of cards. That's my understanding. Is that right, Yanks?
Yeah, what they've done is they've gone back and taken some cards, like I believe Consider, that basically the card says the text of Surveillance. Look at the top card of your library, you may put it into your graveyard. But it didn't use the word, so some other cards from the most recent Ravnica block that said like whenever you surveil wouldn't trigger off that. So they've changed a few cards to make those say surveil because they're going to continue to use that keyword for that ability.
Absolutely. And honestly, Surveil is kind of a cool little thing. It fuels your graveyards. It's a way more unique ability than Scry because it kind of enables a lot of other archetypes, which I think is super fun.
Agreed, and we'll see with the next mechanic one of those that it can enable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you actually take this one away. We're going to go ahead and go over Unearth next.
Yeah, Unearth is a returning mechanic that historically we've only ever seen on creatures. In this case, it is only on artifacts in this set, where basically if the card is in the graveyard, you can pay the unearth cost at sorcery speed to return it to the battlefield with haste, and at the end of the next turn, beginning of the next end step, it gets exiled. Or if it would leave the battlefield for any other reason, it gets exiled. So it gives your creatures historically like a second life.
Yep. Well, not a full life. It just kind of comes into play for one turn. Yep. So it looks like really good with ETB effects, things like that.
It's great with ETB effects, things that sacrifice things. Yep.
And the Unearth, ability is actually pretty cheap. 2 mana for a creature that's typically 3. So you're not necessarily paying an cost for it, but that makes sense because you're not going to get to keep it. But I think it's a pretty interesting thing, and you guys can see here on the Thopter that this is actually on creatures, but it's also on other things. This is the first time we're really seeing Unearth on other permanents that are not creature-based. So here on Mishra's research desk, we've got an artifact that you can sack, it does something, but you can actually unearth the artifact, bring it back, and use its ability a second time, which is pretty cool. It does mean you have to have the mana to do the unearth plus the cost of it, but it kind of gives your, one-time use artifacts a little bit more reach, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah, it's nice. This was the Grixis signature mechanic from Shards of Alara when it was only on creatures, but now we get to see it elsewhere as well.
Now I know, Yanks, you had a little bit of like some lore tidbits you wanted to share about Unearth.
Yeah, I think Unearth is just a perfect flavor for this set. The Brothers War storyline, just the beginning of it, it's 2 brothers that are sent to basically a camp that is an archaeological digging up the Thran artifacts. So just the entire idea of, and this is where the Mightstone and Weakstone are discovered, which is a card in this set. There's all sorts of lore tidbits that come from that, but that's what an archaeologist, man, I can't talk today. That's what they do. They unearth things. Like, I just think it's a sort of a really perfect flavor, especially that it's for all artifacts, only in this set, as opposed to just any type of creature.
Yeah, 'cause that is very, very flavorful. I love when the mechanics match the flavor of what's going on in the rest of the set. Like, we knew it was a pretty big flavor fail not to have madness in, like, some of the more spooky sets, right? But it would just be too broken. Like, madness with blood tokens would have just been way too much. But it would have been super flavorful, and I think people were pretty disappointed to not see madness there.
Yeah, there are definitely reasons on madness there, why we didn't see party in the D&D set.
Oh, that was
weird.
huge. What the heck was that about?
I know there are development and design reasons for it, but it just, come on, find a way. Like, it feels like you should find a way.
I forgot about party. I'm still mad about that, and I forgot I was mad about it. Man, I'm losing my touch. All right, so we've got one more returning mechanic. We actually have meld. 2 cards are going to be combining to sort of flip into one crazy monster card on the back. So we're going to take a look here at Urza, Lord Protector, and the Might Stone and Weakness, which on the bottom you'll notice it says melds with Urza, Lord Protector. So Yanks, you want to tell us how this works before we reveal the melded card?
Yeah, so there are 3 pairs of meld creatures in this set, or meld cards in this set. There are only 3 in the set.
Oh, we know without the spoilers?
Correct. We know there are 3 pairs. There's Urza, there's Mishra, and there's Titania.
Okay. I thought maybe they could still throw some more in there, but I suppose not.
And each one of them will meld. The trigger that causes them to meld work in slightly different ways. So if you flip back to Urza Lord Protector, it'll say it on the bottom like what. I believe for Urza, it's you pay some amount of mana. 7, you have to have both of them on the battlefield. They will both get exiled and come back together as this giant Planeswalker, 2-card sized Planeswalker.
Yes, and the backs of the card actually have half of the art on them, which is pretty interesting to see. And it is literally going to just be a jumbo-sized card, which is very, very strange. But here we are. Yeah, it's a lot of mana, right? You have to commit 5 for the stone, 3 for the Urza himself, and then you have to pay the 7 cost to do the meld, and they have to survive in the meantime, right? Because I assume you can't pay all of the mana in the same turn. So it's tough. Yeah. It's definitely going to be really hard to get these things to meld, but once you do, you'll have a big monster of sorts. We'll go over what they actually do in the set review. What do you think of the meld mechanic, Yanks? Are you glad to see it back or not so much?
I didn't like it the first time around. I'm sort of liking it this time just because of the lore aspect to it. To use Urza as an example, Urza is one of the brothers, the 2 brothers, Urza and Mishra. Urza is just a artificer who, throughout the course of the novel, The Brothers' War, him and Mishra find the Power Stone that splits into the Might Stone and Weak Stone, and at the end, he melds with the Power Stones to turn into a Planeswalker. That's what gives him his spark. He doesn't have one. Naturally, it's contained within the Power Stone because Power Stone absorbed it. Different storyline, don't take too long from the book The Thran. But, Mishra and the Phyrexian Dragon Engine meld together because that happens at the end of the story. Like, I kind of like that.
You've always been the one that knows more of the story than me because I just don't believe, in stories. They're fun when I hear them, but, I don't actively, go after... I don't pay attention to the stories in the games that I play. I read a lot of books or something, but I don't tend to focus on... World of Warcraft, I just skip past all the text boxes. We don't need those. No story necessary. But you are way more knowledgeable about this set than you have been about any of the other ones. You've known some tidbits, but you've never been holy crap, man, this is a lot.
Well, the thing for me was I always followed the storyline because I read the novels. I mean, they used to come. You could buy basically the equivalent of the current bundle came with the novel, and that's what got me. And that's what got me starting to read them. I think the first one I read was Nemesis, and then I went back and bought the old ones and read them. And once they stopped making the books, which I'm sure they stopped making because they didn't sell well, I just stopped paying nearly as much attention to the storyline.
Yeah, I think I had a couple of those when I was really young, and I think when I first got them, I think that they were a little too high reading level for me at the time. And then by the time I got there, I think they had stopped doing that long, a long time ago. So.
Yeah, they went from making 1% to then they would have one for a block that sort of was related to the story but didn't tell the whole thing. And then, yeah, I just kind of stopped paying nearly as much attention to the story once they went away from that.
All right, well, now that we know about the new, returning meld mechanic, be ready to, Mighty Morphin Power Ranger your way into some double crazy flip side cards. Let's go ahead and move on to the Clay Champion. This is a little bit, not a full mechanic that you guys are going to see throughout the set, but there are sort of a print run of these, and so we thought it would be worth kind of bringing your attention to. This reminded me the most of the Eldraine mechanic, which was called... Oh, Yanks, come on. You let me down.
I'm blanking on it.
Oh, man. We had such a good rhythm going. I thought for sure you were going to have it.
It was Adamant.
Adamant, yes. So this reminds me a lot of the Eldraine mechanic. Adamant, where if in Eldraine you pay 3 of the same color, you got some sort of bonus. Where this says something a little bit different. For each pair of the same color spent, you get a bonus. So again, we'll go over the ratings later, but let's just talk about what this one does. Clay Champion enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each double forest spent to cast. So it's, 4 colorless and X. You can pump that up as much as you want. And then it also comes into play, enters the battlefield, choose up to 2 other target creatures you control for each double white spent, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. So it gets bigger and bigger, but you can just cast this for 4, right? Which if you have 2 and 2...
Yeah.
The colors don't need to be specific to the X cost. You can use green for, like in mono green, does this just do what I think it does?
In mono green, this is a 4 mana 8/8.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
So, and if you happen to draw it early, it's insane. If you happen to draw it late, it's also more insane. So I love these sort of X spells that sort of, are able to be flexible in when they are cast, which I think are always really nice. But this is going to be weird in constructed because you can pay these costs very easily. In limited, it's going to be a little bit tougher. Like I remember the Adamant was sometimes hard to trigger in 2-color decks. So this might be something similar.
What's interesting to me is it does seem a lot like Adamant, but I think it's going to play a little differently because, if you play it in a monocolor deck, it'll play the same. But it doesn't require you to be in that monocolor deck like Adamant was trying to push you into because you've got multiple options. What it really does, at least this card, is discourage 3-color decks.
Yes.
Because it's going to be hard to get double anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to be a lot different in that you have the flexibility. Like Adamant, we never had the option to pay 3 green or 3 white. It was always 3 of only 1, which was tough because sometimes you would have, 3 and 1 or whatever, or 2 and 2. This is so much more forgiving in that if you have 3 and 1, it doesn't matter which direction, you're going to get some sort of bonus. If you have 2 and 2, great. If you happen to be 2 and 4, even better. But like you don't have a huge punishment even later in the game when you're 3 and 3 mana base wise, then this is still a monster.
Yeah, and I believe there's one other of these we've seen so far, which is also a mythic, and it has 3 different abilities, and it's for double blue, double black, double red.
And that one is also high rarity, right? So this is not
also a mythic,
you guys have to worry about like in your every draft thing, but it seemed important enough to, bring some attention to because these are colorless. They're going to fit in any deck. This is probably worth playing, even if you're only one of these 2 colors. So it should be a pretty interesting card to see throughout the set and see how it plays out. You ready to move on to the different archetypes, Yanks?
Yeah, I think so. We have a good set of another full set of 10 in this set, which is always nice.
Yeah, and honestly, the set. The description of the different archetypes sometimes are very unique and sometimes they're just the most generic definition of like Boros ever. But this time we actually have a little bit of more unique ones. We actually have what is written in sort of like the patch notes for the set, and we're just going to read those and we are going to match them up with whatever the card is that we found that sort of matches that theme.
Yeah, it was nice to have descriptions that weren't like Gruul Smash.
Yeah. Definitely. So. Like I think the Dominaria one was just like the worst, right? So like Azorius was just like flyers or, super generic. But here we have overwhelm your opponent on the ground and in the skies. A little generic, but we'll take it. So this is the blue-white, and we've got a creature here that attacks with 5 or more soldiers. It gains flying and does some stuff. So it does give you that sort of go wide feel, and it also does exactly what you want it to do and has some evasion attached.
Yep, but it's very specifically blue-white, a soldier's archetype. There's even a blue-white rare land that benefits having soldiers.
Yes.
So blue-white you don't often think of as tribal, but it is in this set.
Yeah, it actually says, you're correct. It does say blue-white soldiers in the notes. That's what this archetype is called. The next archetype says white-black scrappy swarm. So creatures with mana value 3 or less offer more than you might expect. So here we have a little creature. It's actually kind of a high mana cost, so not quite what that says, but this one also plays in very nicely with creatures with 3 or less mana value give you a nice bonus. So again, kind of playing into that sort of weaker creature thing.
Yeah, you're right. The 5 mana doesn't seem like it fits the theme, but every other part of this card does. It gets you extra value for cheap things coming back from the graveyard. It gets the extra value for the ones that are already there. It's great.
Moving on to blue-black, it says draw power is the archetype. And it says draw a multitude of cards from your deck to strengthen your creatures. So here we have a well above rate creature that says, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard, help you sort of smooth your hand, which is always great. And as long as you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, it gets bigger and gets menace. That's exactly what the description of the archetype says.
Yeah, the only weird thing with this card is the ability triggers itself, but it doesn't have haste, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I think the idea is that each card in the archetype will trigger itself, which will trigger all of the other things sort of as you go, right? So playing
Agreed.
this after something else is what's doing it. So if the cards that you're playing each turn is progressing your board state and triggering your mechanic, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, moving on to blue-red, we have Prowess Aggro is the archetype title, and it says use cheap artifacts, instants, and sorcery spells to press their advantage. So here we have a pretty cheap human monk that says whenever you cast a spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, which makes sense because you're going to be getting a lot of instants and sorceries. You're also going to be creating a lot of artifacts and have good use for them. So this monk is doing everything this archetype wants to do.
Yep, and for any Eternal format fans, this is going to go straight into Legacy Goodbye Young Pyromancer.
Really? It's going to eat Young Pyromancer?
It triggers off more things, and it pitches to Force of Will, which is just better than Pyromancer.
Okay, I like it. All right, moving on to red-black sacrifice. I'm leaving that in. Artifact Sacrifice. I tried to mix those two both ways you could possibly mix that.
Sacrifact Artifice.
It's late. I need more coffee. Okay. Red, black, Artifact Sacrifice. It says use power stones to be sacrificed for more power. So here we've got a little card that says when it enters the battlefield, you create a power stone. Great, we need those. And then you can pay 3 mana, sacrifice another creature or an artifact. I think we just made one. How convenient. Until end of turn, other creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain menace and haste. Ratings we'll deal with later in the future videos. But for now, we're just going to talk about how this is enabling everything that this archetype wants to do.
Yeah, it feeds itself. Not on the turn it comes into play, but the artifact also, helps pay for the ability. The Power Stone, I mean. So, yeah, this is exactly what this is going to be doing. Be curious to see if we have a viable threaten effect in this format.
Also, it's good to note that any time a card comes into play and makes 2 things, you feel pretty good about it. It's always going to perform better than you might expect.
Especially given that these, unlike, say, food or treasure, this stays. Right? This isn't a one-use thing.
Well, I think there are a lot of things like this card's ability that's going to have you sacrifice them. So I think that they will help you ramp, but at a certain point, you're going to be wanting to sacrifice them.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, we've got the black-green graveyard counter. It says creatures that rely on a populated graveyard will gain power in the late game. And that's exactly what this little guy does here. It's a add mana based on the creatures in your graveyard. So it's a pretty big mana dork. It's pretty expensive. It's got a big booty, but it, again, is going to be getting more and more powerful. This will be great to use for any of those big X spells, like that big crazy one we just saw, right? That had you pay X in multiples, the Mythic.
Yeah, it's great for that. This set's going to probably have more expensive things than usual because Prototype allows you to put them in the set without it being too top heavy.
Yeah.
Since you can still cast them for cheap. So you're going to see some more 7s, 8s, and you're going to be able to play them in your deck as opposed to them just being, unplayable.
Yeah. That's true, because you can have more than one 7-drop because you draw one early, you play it for the Prototype cost, and the late one you have idiots like this that will help you get more mana, plus the Power Stones. So that's just going to be a huge source of ramp for most decks.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of big artifacts in this set, and big mana dorks like this are going to be better than usual.
All right, moving on, we've got red-green. We have Mechanized Stompy. Use Power Stones to deploy your biggest threats and back them up with big boosting spells. So this is sort of like a hybrid spell. We've seen it's a creature that comes into play with a Power Stone, which helps you ramp into those big powerful things, but it also puts +1/+1 counters, gives haste, or deals damage. So sort of a very flexible card that allows you to do a ton at a pretty decent rate.
Yeah, I think this is one of the archetypes we're still waiting on seeing a lot of stuff spoiled for, but this does a little bit of what it's talking about in multiple different ways.
Definitely true. We're getting closer to the end here. We have red-white. It says Unearth aggro, which is interesting to see, the sort of Boros aggro-y bits be the Unearth archetype. I would expect that to be a little bit more in black, but it says start your aggression early, and in the second wave that comes back with Unearth may bring you victory. And here we have a little first striker that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So you're going to be getting an additional bonus when you unearth those cards. So losing them at the end of the turn isn't such a hit because you got so much value from them re-entering the battlefield.
Yeah, red-white in this format seems to be leaning a bit more into what they were trying to do with Lorehold and Strixhaven, with the returning out of the graveyard theme than your typical pure Boros. It's still supposed to be aggressive, but it's leaning into the graveyard a bit.
Absolutely. And then we have green-white. Artifact enters the battlefield is the theme of the archetype. And it says, assemble your creatures and enhance them with artifacts. Then use Power Stones, soldier tokens, and unearth creatures to power your attack. All right, so we've got this little 2-mana 1/1. Better do something pretty good. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, so it does say it has a lot of artifacts in the deck itself, plus you're going to be making a ton of Power Stones. I think this could get very big very quickly.
Yeah, the critical thing with this is that it doesn't say non-token artifact.
Yes.
So it allows Power Stones to trigger it. It allows any 1/1 constructs or things like that to trigger it.
But I don't expect there to be as many Power Stones in this archetype as there will be in the green-blue, which the theme of the deck is Power Stone Ramp. It says accumulate Power Stones to help build your defense. Now, there wasn't a multicolor card that sort of fit into this theme, so we went ahead and just picked one of the blue colors. It says splitting the Power Stone. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact, probably a Power Stone you've already made, and then you can create 2 tapped Power Stones and sacrifice. If the sacrificed artifact was a legendary, you draw a card in addition. So that's pretty neat. I don't know that the legendary part will come in handy in limited so much, but I'm sure it's really good in limited or constructed.
Yeah, and this is, this card, the art and the name is showing you like one of the key moments of the storyline. It's when the 2 brothers grabbed the Power Stone and it split in half and they each ended up with 1/2, which kind of started the whole conflict.
Ah.
Which is, you'll see the card that we showed earlier with Urza, the Might Stone and the Weak Stone. Those are the 2 stones.
Yeah, well, Urza has the 2 stones in his eyes, right?
You see who wins.
Yeah. Definitely. Very, very flavorful set. So with this card, guys, again, we didn't really have anything that was spoiled yet that really fit this archetype, but we see cards in both green and in blue that do exactly what they suggested here. So that is the end of our 10 archetypes. The one of the last things we wanted to bring to your guys' attention is that you might have noticed that there were only 6 of these pain lands that were brought in the last couple of sets, which is weird. You would think it would have been like 5 and 5, but there wasn't. It was 6, and the reason for that is because they thought they could only support, I think, 4 here, or they wanted more support in the early set. Just to make standard a little bit more viable, we are going to be getting the remaining 4 of these pain lands here, and we chose Llanowar Wastes because I like the little fairy guy. He's cute.
Yeah, I believe one of the developers, Maro or somebody, said that when they were testing standard, they just thought one of the color pairs that wasn't in there didn't have good enough mana, so they felt like they had to add the 6th one to Dominaria United to balance it out for constructed.
That definitely makes sense. Yeah, I figured it was something along those lines, especially because they came out just post-rotation when the pool is the smallest and we have the least number of like flexible lands. So that tends to be when aggro decks are very strong. That tends to be when monocolor decks are very strong. So adding that extra land probably gave us a little bit more diversity in the field and constructed. So I definitely like that, but I'm glad we have all 10 in the field now.
Yeah, these cards are always good lands to have. They've been reprinted before. They're named after locations in Dominaria, so since we come back here often enough, it's easy enough for them.
I'm also really glad that they didn't just do 5 again and reprint one of those same lands that was just seen, because we've seen them do that with cards like, what was it, Trespassers something or other?
Yeah, I know what card you're talking about, but I can't remember the full name of it.
It's something Trespass, I think. Either way, it was printed in like multiple sets back to back, and we were forced to collect multiple copies of it before we were able to do the set completion and get extra gems or whatever. So I'm glad that we only have the 4 and they didn't just stick an extra one in there to make it, even, which would have been gross.
Yeah, it probably left them in an artifact type set. It probably left them a slot that they could design some sort of cool artifact colorless utility land.
Oh, absolutely. And there's definitely going to be, I think we see a couple of them already, and over the next couple of days, there'll be a few more. I think that's it for the information we wanted to give you guys for Brothers War. Yanks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for this set?
I'm pretty excited. I guess probably like a 7 or so. I always need to see some more of the cards, but the lore stuff is on point enough that I'm interested enough in seeing what they've got.
For me, it's a little less because I've never really been super heavy in artifact sets just in general, and the lore itself doesn't really speak to me. A, because I don't really know much about it, but also B, because I'm more high fantasy and I don't really like once we get into the more sci-fi stuff. I do think Transformers are dope. You guys will be able to get some cool Transformer cards in the special sets, but for the most part, I would much rather see, knights and dragons as opposed to big mech robot things. So
yeah, that's fair.
Flavor-wise, I'm a little bit lower. I think it's going to be a 5, but it is one of the most beloved stories and beloved sets and the most hype. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that Wizards took that into account and really took the extra time to make this a wonderful limited format for us.
I will say generally artifact sets have caused problems, but usually not too much in limited. They usually tend to break standard in half, but they usually aren't too negative for standard. Or for limited, you generally end up with a lot of playables, which is nice because you have so many decks.
Yeah, and it's also good post-rotation because a lot of these can be played in any color deck, which is cool. It gives you a little bit more flexibility there when our mana bases are at its weakest. But yeah, I think that's it for us tonight, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed our introduction to the Brothers War. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button because in the next few days, we'll be releasing the set reviews where we go over every single card in the Brothers War in a limited perspective, 0 to 5, 1 to 5, whatever we do, and talk about the different synergies that you guys will be able to find and walk you guys through everything you'll need to know to draft and play sealed in this format. Thank you, Yanks, for joining us.
Anytime.
And we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Woo, we did it. I'd like to end this video with a special thank you to those of you guys who have signed up for my Patreon. Without my wonderful patrons, none of this content would be possible. If you'd like to support this content and get your name up on the Wall of Fame, you can sign up for our Patreon by using the link down below in the description. Another way you can support the channel is by using code MNG5 with Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find cool stuff in stock. They have everything you need for Magic, board games, and any of your other nerdy hobbies.